Hello and welcome to GUYLOGIC. My name is Temko and today we are taking a look at a game called Stellaris. Developed and published by Paradox, it is a classic style sci-fi 4X game. And if you're not familiar with 4X means, it stands for explore, expand, exploit, and exterminate, meaning you build an empire, you expand that empire, you micromanage your planets, your civilizations, and your people, and you use that advantage to decimate your enemies in a variety of ways. Most of these games are turn-based, this one isn't, and that is a bit of a twist, which is pretty interesting. Now first we're going to dive into the options menu and talk a little bit about PC performance and all stuff like that. If you're not interested in that sort of thing, I suggest you press the annotation on screen and skip straight ahead to the gameplay section. Be warned, this is going to be a long one. So, settings. When we look at settings, it is very bare bones. There's only the full screen on or off, the resolution option, the refresh rate, as well as a multi-sample level. It doesn't explain anything, and there's nothing like AA, post effects, or anything like that available. Now the game doesn't look bad at all, but this bare bones options menu is very much a disappointment to me personally, because I expect to be able to customize these games to my heart's content. And while you can customize the gameplay, the actual technical thing of the game can't, and that is a real damn shame. Sound-wise, you have a bunch of sliders, no complaints at all here. The advisor, which is sort of the tutorial/tooltip system, is very in-depth and offers a lot of stuff, and it's also fully voiced, which is pretty cool and interesting. Gameplay-wise, you have a couple of options like how often it autosaves, whether or not you want to autosave to cloud, and things like that. Some of these you can also change and edit before you launch a game, just to be sure you know what you're doing. Now obviously this is a very subpar options menu. There's no rebindable keys. There's basically no advanced graphical options or anything like that. The game doesn't support colorblind mode. It doesn't have any extra stuff like that. I am very disappointed in the technical side of this PC version. It doesn't mean the game runs bad. On the contrary, it runs extremely well. I have a stable 60 FPS at any given time. I have never dipped below 60. Now, obviously not unexpected, but the game looks stunningly beautiful, even fully zoomed in, considering that it is a game played on a grand space opera scale. So, combining those two things, the game looks pretty damn fabulous. Some of the planet effects, some of the star effects, even the black hole effects are pretty fucking amazing, and we'll show all of that in a little bit. So, I just want to show you this options menu. See that options-wise, the game isn't all that cut out to be. There's one more thing to show you, which is the multiplayer, before we dive into the actual gameplay. Now, the multiplayer and the single player play more or less the same. The major difference is obviously you're playing against other players. Now, if you're playing on a very large map, this can be a very, very long time playing. So keep that in mind if you're wanting to try the multiplayer. It's mostly designed around people that enjoy long games. But I must stress that my experiences with the multiplayer come from a very limited press set of people in the press build. So your experiences may vary wildly from mine during actual release gameplay with a large community. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into a new game. We're going to show you the race building and all that stuff like that. So when you want to create a new game, you can select one of many pre-selected races. These are pre-built races for a quick start, and they vary both in view, form, and function, as well as how they play quite a bit. Now most of these visual changes are exactly that, basically visual changes. But these various modifiers they have, such as pacifist and fanatic spiritualist, do definitely impact both the diplomatic side of things as well as the research and development side of things. They also impact how well your people like you if you enact various policies that are against their base beliefs. These various red lasers and hyperspace travel are your starting technologies, and they allow a variety of things. Now, if you want to create a new race, you can. You just select create new, select your empire, and it lets you select a whole bunch of things on the left side menu. You can start by selecting the appearance from the various mammals, reptiles, avians, arthropods, fungoids, name it, whatever you like or want. After that, you can select a name. I'm going to go random here. Your various leader names, as well as your genetic traits. Now these traits are pretty important. You have traits left in terms of how many traits you pick, as well as how many points you have. So picking a trait, let's say that costs 2 points, will result in me having no points left, but needing to pick 3 more traits. So I can go and say non-adaptive and gain 1 point back, and I can say slow breeder, which are negatives for my empire, but it will allow me to grab talented as well. Bring me down to a nice even 0-0, giving me 2 very interesting traits that allow me to grow more food, allow me to unlock skill levels, but my empire will grow slower, and my people don't really react well to foreign environments. After selecting a bunch of these traits and mix matching with that, you can choose the visuals of your starting ruler, the way they look, and all the stuff like that. This ruler, he's gonna die eventually, and a different ruler will replace him, and that ruler will have the same general style, mostly a different color scheme as opposed to that. It doesn't really do anything, it just lets you customize a little bit of what you want. Now you can also select the type of world you want. These are continental worlds, ocean worlds, arctic worlds, tundras, now name it, whatever you want. This is also the preferred world your race will start on, meaning that if you find new worlds while you're exploring space, and they're not similar to these worlds, for example an arid world and a desert world or a tundra world are pretty similar, but the difference between an arid world and an ocean world is humongous, so the adaptation of your people to those worlds is going to suffer for that. You can also select what kind of visuals city you want, and then comes the last part, which is deciding the government and ethics. That's the major last thing you are going to be deciding that impacts your gameplay quite a bit. Now you have 3 ethic points left, and each ethic costs a certain number of points. If I say I want fanatic materialist, that costs 2 points, and then if I want to add xenophobe, that adds another point. That's it. Those are 2 I can select. I can select this fanatic xenophobe because that would imply I have 3 points. You can also not mix and match like you could with the racial traits, but you can add 3 points. Now based on what you have selected, both in terms of racial, in terms of world, and in terms of your ethics, you have a type of democracy you can select, a type of government I should say. A variety of these things also have different benefits or side effects. For example, a despotic empire has a lowered military station cost for 15%, which means that other empires that are democracies or other forms of government will definitely not like you doing it this way. You have a couple of these benefits, but other empires might not approve of that. So there is that. Now this last thing is something you don't often see in 4X's these days. There's different ways to travel faster than light. There's warp travel, there's hyperspace travel, and there's wormhole travel. Each of these functions in a different fashion. Warp travel is pretty slow in terms of movement speed between planets and sectors, but it allows you to move everywhere, unlimited to the constraints of other systems. Hyperspace travel requires you to move to predefined paths between systems that are pre-existing in the game, and wormhole travel requires you to create a wormhole generator that has a radius from which you can travel from point to point. So you have to make skip jumps forward and forward to use a wormhole travel, which is pretty cool, but it is more advanced and requires you to think ahead. I'm going to go with hyperspace in this situation. So I've skipped a few steps here, but once you create your race and you're ready to start your game, we have the type of galaxy you want to start off. You can go with Iron Man mode, which means you only want 1 save file. This is sort of the customization you can have to start up the game in general. Now I really do like the very in-depth racial creation system, but what disappoints me about the setting up of a game is the map selection screen. You only have a couple of galaxy types with a couple of star systems, and you can only move around a few sliders. You barely have any options to customize the type of mobs that are available, to have modifiers that are in play, something you'd expect from a game like this. Even looking at a different title like Polaris Sector has quite a few more, and that was a 2-man indie title. Looking at Civilizations or other games of this type, these are options you simply expect to have, and they are not available in this title. So in my opinion, that is somewhat of a disappointment to a very well-rounded race and empire creation screen and system that really does bring quite a bit of life to this title and to the genre in general. Now when you press play, the game starts, and you will start with 1 planet. We're gonna press play and show you the first initial couple of minutes of gameplay, so let's get into it. When you first load into a game, it lets you do a couple of things. Obviously, it gives you a little bit of lore, a little bit of backstory, tells you what you have signed up for, what you are, where you are, etc. You can begin the game, and the first thing that you're asked is whether or not the type of tutorial you want. Now, as a first-time player, I wholeheartedly tell you, go with a full tutorial, because the tips are interesting, but they're not in depth. The tutorial is really good, and you can disable repeat messages if you want to. Use the full tutorial because this is a complex game with many layers of micro and macro management. You need to know what you're doing, otherwise you're gonna run yourself in a corner and have a much less fun experience. Okay, one of the first things you'll notice is that the game is paused. You have an active pause. You can trigger this at any given time you want. The game has multiple speed modes, going from fastest down to fast, normal speed, slow, slowest. Pretty straightforward. You can switch between these as you like, and you can always press pause, and that will fully pause the game for everyone involved. All of this is your starting position. If you go to the galaxy map, we'll see that this is an empire of many stars, and each star has a couple of jumps. Now you can see here that these lines you see on the map indicate the hyperdrive tunnels I can access. So to go from where I am right now to a different location, I go from hyperdrive area to area to area to area. If I was traveling faster than light speed, I could just select to go from here to here, no problem. If I was using a warp drive, and I'll show you that in a different gameplay segment, you'll see a big circle around it and you can jump to all those areas as you wish. Obviously you can jump beyond them, and faster than light is very slow. So that is the base start of the game. There's one more thing here I want to note before we continue, and that is the first and main negative I have of this game. It is when we take a look at technology. Now in most 4Xs and in most games like this, research and expanding options over a period of time is very important. In this game they have 3 different types of research you can select at any given time. You can select the research type physics, you can select the research type for societal research, such as bond influence, and you can select an engineering type research. Each of these have a whole ton of stuff you can unlock and do during gameplay. Each of them has a development time, each of them has bonuses associated with them. You can see them in the top of the screen, the blue, green, and orange icons. All really good. Problem I have with this screen is that it doesn't tell you what your research will lead into. It doesn't tell you what kind of research you might unlock doing that. It also doesn't tell you what research is coming up, what kind of options you have down the line. It doesn't let you plan ahead for research. All you can do is blindly follow what you have previously researched, which is mostly your starting tech in this build, as well as the wiki about information. I don't like this UI. I like the system, but the way they display it doesn't give me a lot of control over knowing what the upcoming research stations are. It also doesn't give me a lot of information in what they do outside of a very small tooltip. If I'm looking to research, for example, the physics lab, it doesn't tell me how much more I can expect out of it. It doesn't tell me what the prerequisites are for building it. It merely tells me this is what you'll get. Now, physics lab is a pretty simple, straightforward aspect. But for example, at one point I could research growing amoebae that could fight as ships in space, yes, living ships, but it never told me how to get them built. So it took me quite a few minutes to figure out that they're only used for space stations that are defensive structures. You can't use them as ships as far as I know. And that's a bit of a shame because I was really looking forward to building them on ships, and I spent a lot of time researching them, thinking I can use them as assault vessels and they regenerate their health. I couldn't, mostly because the game didn't provide the necessary information I need for that while I'm doing the research and pre-planning. So that is a major negative, I think, for the research system in terms of presenting the information available. Outside of the tutorial, full-scale tutorial system, which is phenomenal, they also have a sort of help system. This basically loads an external website, Wikipedia website, into the game. This is a very lazy solution. Games like Polaris Sector that are very small indie studio development projects have in-game glossaries explaining all these things. Even very simple games like Mars Zero have in-game glossaries explaining everything. So I'm very disappointed that Paradox Entertainment, a very large developer with a great pedigree of building these types of games that understand micromanagement, macromanagement, and pre-planning, have failed to do so. Outside of it being in a wiki, which is arranged itself, but it's fine to have, it's also not very complete. I'm assuming they expect players to fill it up and go from there, which will probably work for them. But if you are just starting out at release day, you're going to be stumped quite a bit about things you're just not sure what they are. And using the help system with the external wiki just doesn't help you that much if the advisor doesn't give you the exact information you need. So those are my 2 major gripes with the game. Now let's go ahead and dive into a different segment, and we'll talk about all the various aspects that make this game up and whether or not those are any good. Okay, so here we go. Now, before we dive into various aspects of the game, just to bring you up to speed in what this empire is basically a bit further advanced. It's about 40 game years in, and I have a couple of planets, and I'm using wormhole technology to travel. As you can see, there's a big circle around my home planet, which is where my wormhole generator is, and from there I can jump to all these systems around me. There's an empire to the south and an empire to the north, and as you can see, there's a little bit of a contested zone here, which is a planet that is now independent, which I liberated by going to war against this empire, which is the Frubaralav Theocracy. I'm mispronouncing that name completely, but that is okay. In my empire, I have a ton of stuff going on. I have 3 home planets that each have their own aspects to it. And this home planet is protected by a major minefield. It has some planetary stations to mine minerals. And this home planet again is protected by a different minefield. And this one even has a mining station in orbit that produces a rare material called the Bethrinian stone. Other than that, my empire is all over the place with a variety of mining stations in various sectors. These are all things I have surveyed and explored. Now, let's talk about the 4 aspects of the 4X that make up this game. And starting with that is exploration. Exploration you generally do in 2 fashions. 1, you do it with science vessels, and 2, you do it with your military ships. If you do it with a science vessel and a science vessel comes across a AI or enemy NPC opponent, I gotta make the distinction between NPC and AI. AI is enemy races and NPC is unaffiliated factions. In Civilizations, these were barbarians. In other games, they're other things. These are non-controlled computer opponents that just free-form exist in the world. You cannot make alliances with them. You cannot really interact with them. They're just sort of there as a starting point to make the world not feel as empty before races and empires get built. Now, you do so by right-clicking a system and saying Survey System. Once the system is surveyed, you'll get all these numbers and information on screen. Energy available, materials available, and research available in that system. Once a planet has a certain thing, like for example, this asteroid has a ability to get 2 minerals mined out of it, you can make a mining station next to it. The same goes for this planet, which has 3 minerals, another mining station. Obviously, these also have upkeep and all that stuff. Once exploration starts, and let me find my science vessel and speed this up to fastest. My science vessel is going to sail to the edge of my system, join my wormhole generator. From there, it's going to travel to my main system where my wormhole generator is, jump away from that system, and then jump to the next system. All wormhole travel always goes thus. Wherever you are, back to the wormhole system, and from the wormhole system to wherever you need to go. And if you have to go further than that, you have to go to the next wormhole system, and from there, jump to the next system you want to go to. Pretty straightforward, but obviously a lot more complex than just right-clicking somewhere and saying go there, using either hyperspace travel or faster than light movement. Once a science vessel gets to a system and it is queued up for surveying, it will start going from planet to planet, moon to moon, asteroid to asteroid, and even includes this neutron star or star system available. As you can see, exploration is done in 2 ways. 1, once exploration begins, a little bar starts running when the ship is there. That bar decides what's going on the planet. You see here in the bottom left, you can see he's surveying the planet right now. And you'll also see how many planets and asteroids and moons I have left available to survey. If there is something to be found, an icon will appear, like here, and it says it has 2 minerals available for mining. I could then choose to grab my construction ship and send it over here to create a mining facility. This is the basis of it. Now obviously you do not do one thing at a time. I have 2 science vessels. The other science vessel is currently performing research. There was a battle. This is a planet I destroyed, and I was able to gather a bunch of research. I also have an objective here that allows me to explore systems and figure things out in them. One of these objectives was to find a very specific creature and gather that creature. And that creature was on this planet. I used a science vessel, selected the planet, and selected the research project. It's almost complete now. At that point, I'll probably get a bonus, a little bit of skill, maybe some points in my research tree, maybe unlock the ability to research a special technology. There's quite a few things you unlock using this. In certain other situations, you can find underdeveloped civilizations, EA pre-spacefaring civilizations, and you can set up observatory outposts on them and get research points that way. There are certain situations where you may find wreckage from ancient civilizations that existed millions of years ago, and you can get technology out of that. So all your exploration is based around finding new habitable planets, finding old technology, and finding mineral deposits to then expand to. And in that regard, the game does a pretty great job. There are some dangers by going into a zone or sector that science vessels will never get into. For example, there is a sector here. I have explored this sector. Every sector around it I have explored, except this one. Why? Because in this sector there's an alien race. These are crystalline entities. They're just basically floating sentient crystals, and those crystals have that much military power that in the very early game, when I first initially started exploring, I didn't have the armed forces to move them away. I didn't have the science vessels to spare to try and get in there anyway, so I never touched this system. As such, I have no idea if this system has habitable planets. It says it does. If there's any resources in this system, I can exploit, building colonies, building mining facilities. I simply don't know. Now, up to this point, I have quite an army, so I can probably dislodge these and get a science vessel there eventually. But this is one of the dangers you'll face when exploring. And this duality does bring a little bit of variety to a normally mundane exploration system. Another danger obviously is going into other players' territories before knowing that, though that is usually mitigated by the fact that these are mostly outlined on the map as soon as you come across them in some form or fashion. Once exploration is done, obviously, expansion takes over. Expansion is done in two fashions. One, you can do so by constructing outposts like I'm constructing here. These outposts will expand your borders further and further ahead, allowing you to get more control over sectors and build in those sectors. If you look at the current map, you'll see that this red zone is mine, and to build in this Yarak system, which has quite a bit of energy I need, because my energy needs are pretty low, I need to build a frontier outpost there, so I can build mining facilities in orbit around the various regions. It's also required to colonize worlds, and so on and so forth. Other than that, expansion is based around colonizing worlds. Now, world colonization is a pretty straightforward system. To do so, you build a spaceport, you start with one, and you build a colony ship. You do so by researching the colony ship option during research, which I showed you a bit ago. Once a colony ship is built, you can send it to a viable world. If you have found a perfectly viable world, which is a world which has the same ecological systems as your home world, you can settle it, no questions asked. If it's a world like a desert world, which only has 60 or 70% capability for your race, then you will probably need to have research allowing you to settle in that world. And you also get some negative modifiers, preventing you from fully reaching the possibilities of that world because you're not exactly suited for that world. Pretty straightforward and pretty interesting because it forces you to make design decisions regarding the expansion of the empire. I'm going to hold off on getting a perfect world. I'm going to select a bigger world with lots of slots for building new tool sets, or am I going to select a world that isn't as expansive but is readily available and allows you to start expanding your empire and its resource production early on. So these are considerations you have to take with you. On the world, you will see a couple of tiles. Each world has their own set of tiles. For example, my main world has 16 of the tiles because it's a little bit bigger, and my second world only has 12 tiles, meaning the maximum capacity for production, research, and generation of resources is much more limited on this world. Is that a bad thing? Not per se. Maybe you want a smaller planet where you can have better direct control over your populace. Maybe you want a bigger planet where you can enslave a big populace or use robots for all the generation of resources. It's all up to you really, and the game does allow you this level of micro-based control over the various things that are in it. Now, as you can see, there is a alien species here that is not my own. My own are the Selemi, and this is a Gargaxton, which is a different race. Now, I have an agreement with the Empire of the Gargaxtons that we have equal exchange of migrating people. So my people can settle on their worlds and their people can settle on my worlds. This doesn't give them influence, but it might eventually give them a different kind of ethics. For example, my people are A-OK with slavery. My people are also A-OK with amorality, genocide, murder, expansion, warfare. They don't really care. Their main goal is scientific advancement. Whereas the Corrections are a lot more about engineering, research, output, but they're also xenophiles, meaning they actually like other races that much. So while they are settled in my world, he's not really happy. His happiness is 30%. He really doesn't like it. So there is also a little bit there. Should this divergence be too much? Should I have too many on a planet that diverge? I could have a rebellion. I could have cessation, I could have protests, and I have to deal with those accordingly. So you have some control over that as well. On the world where you are, part of expansion is building a variety of buildings. You do so by selecting a tile and building a building on it. As you can see, certain worlds have block tiles. Red borders means I cannot yet remove them because I do not have the required technology. and yellow borders means I can remove them. It takes a little bit of time. All of these buildings can be built on a variety of slots. Some slots have a resource type already associated with them, such as food, minerals, or energy, or research. You can build different buildings on these should you desire to do so, but obviously it gives you better benefits to build a building on it that fits with the predefined type. That way you get more bonuses. Now this tile doesn't have any type, but I know that I have a pretty big need for both energy as well as minerals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a energy power plant here, and that will be used by this populace. Now if you come across a populace and you want to build in a different tile, you can just pick it up, drag it to a different tile, and plump it down there. So you can mix and match where your population is. Population growth is decided on the fact that how many food you have and the food surplus that is available, combined with the migration of other people to that planet, combined with the base rate of growth of your race. For example, if I look here, you'll see that this is a growing population of 1.5 per month, but I also have a robot population that was constructed, and I also have my own population of Selimi that have a growth rate of 1.0 per month maximum, because they have a slower growth rate in this situation. So having all these things and managing all these things, making sure your planets are functional and productional, is a great and important part of the expansion aspect. Two more parts of expansion outside of the outpost building to expand your empire and then being able to build these buildings and settle these worlds is obviously the ability to make diplomatic decisions. One of these diplomatic decisions is to join an empire or an alliance. Alliances can be formed when you have a good diplomatic relation with another empire. Whether this is because you helped them against a common foe, you had many good trade deals, your races are intertwined, and there's a lot of back and forth between migrations. There's many reasons why you can get a good rating with different races. And these races allow you then to make things like embassies and make deals such as migration deals with different worlds. And this allows us to make trade deals, trade resources, but also trade technologies, star charts, and things like that, which is a pretty important aspect to it. So all of that is pretty cool. Now, again, here the main thing I have a problem with is that it's not exactly transparent what you can and can't do. And this is obviously a major thing for many 4X games, and it's no different here. Like I previously described, the research feature that you couldn't really see what you were building to unless you were just guesstimating or using the external wiki to get information on what you will be building towards. With expansion, a slightly similar thing happens. So I dislike that a bit. One of the things the game tries to do is not be turn-based. It does do a pretty good job of making sure that you are playing in real time. Everything in the game ticks over per month cycle. A month cycle is basically how long it takes for the game to tick over. If you're playing on a faster speed, this will take over a lot faster than if you're playing on a normal or slow speed. Also, the game indicates build time as in days as well as months, so you know exactly how long something will take to build. But this might be 1 month, this might be 2 months. So based on that, depends on how many credits, how much influence, and how many energy resources you get to continue expanding and building. So you, on one end, you have a very systematic increase of every 30-31 days. You get a boost of production resources, but you can spend these resources over 3 months while building a capital ship, or building a planet, or colonizing something. So that's a pretty interesting mix of the two ways to display build times. The major systems tick over per month, and all building aspects tick over per day based on the build time. And you can also modify these various modifiers to lower your build times and to lower your research times, or actually get higher research times based on certain other modifiers. So there is exactly a bit of an overflow here and there on that. Now, thirdly, we come to the exploitation part. We already touched upon this in a bit ago, but you have resources you gather, and these resources are stored in a maximum capacity. You get resources by building mining stations or by having planets with buildings on them. All these various buildings that have populace on them generate a certain amount of credits, research points, minerals, and so on and so forth. If a certain area does not have population on it, for example, here I had 2 robot populations, I remove those. That results in these buildings not doing anything because there's currently no population on this sector working there. So that is that. Upgrading buildings allows you to generate more resources, and a variety of buildings allow you to generate all of that. There's a couple of more ways to get resources. Mining stations in orbit generate resources based on the planet they are orbiting, and this can be resources in mining, but also research resources. A different way to generate resources is using the various debris available. For example, if I go to my science vessel, there's some debris here. Select my science vessel, right click and go to research project. I'm able to go there and get some resources. Now these resources doesn't necessarily translate into resources in terms of minerals or energy. It could translate into points to be used in my energy research or society research, or it might also be points that increase the segment of the various researches. And what am I talking about here? Certain researches based on what you research, either by trading it from an enemy, by destroying ships and sort of dissecting them and figuring things out, you get a little bit of a boost on the various research aspects. Meaning I start not 0, which lowers total research time based on the various things I've figured out in the world so far. And I like this mechanic because this type of debris you get from battles, you get it from researching special projects, you find some planets, you get it from finding ancient civilizations. So the exploration, expansion, and thus the exploitation aspect really do tie in with one another quite nicely. You're forced to explore to get better planets, but not only are you forced to explore to get better planets, you also want to explore to see if you can find debris, to see if you can find research, to see if you can find technology, so you can expand your empire more efficiently in the expansion part. Not only that, but that also ties in the exploitation part, where you have more control over what kind of minerals you get, what kind of minerals you store, and what kind of research paths you follow, and not be shoehorned into one or a different path just because you need more minerals now and you have to force an entire system to mine minerals at that point. You can still do that by enacting edicts, but you don't have to. That is the exploitation part. Lastly, we have extermination. Extermination is done by creating a war, and you do so by going into a system and attacking an empire. Combat in this game is pretty simple and straightforward. It's not as dice-based as Civilizations is, but it's still pretty simple. You build ships, these ships form a fleet, this fleet fights with a different fleet or a space station, and based on their hull and based on which target selection goes in first, they sort of have a back and forth with their weapons, and whoever wins, wins. You do not have direct control over various ships in a fleet during combat. You can select a fleet and tell them to flee by using a fast and light technology, which can again be interrupted based on the fleet, and you take a bunch of damage for a emergency warp, but that is where your control over combat ends. Now this is a 4X, and this is not a major focus of the game, but compared to Polaris Sector, that has quite a bit more in-depth combat, which is pretty cool. I am a bit disappointed by the combat system, but, and this is pretty important, it is made up for by the very extensive shipbuilding system. Let's go into that. The ship designer allows you to build a variety of ships, stations, and buildings. When I select a new design, I can select from a bunch of designs I have available right now. There is more of them, such as capital class ships, such as cruisers, and a variety of other things. Each ship, let's select the destroyer, has sections. Some have one section, like a small corvette, some have two sections, like a destroyer, some have more sections, such as larger cruisers, and so on and so forth. Each section has a design, and that design decides what kind of hardpoints are available. Hardpoints come in a variety of categories: small, medium, large. You have hardpoints specifically designed for hangars, where you can deploy different ships out of it, combat ships. You have hardpoints designed for different things, and these hardpoints are available based on the type of section you have selected for your vessel. For example, if I select the Faithbreaker, and I have the second section, and I do the Shine Bulwark, this is going to be what my ship looks like by combining these two sections. You notice I have one large. I can put a LED laser in it. Again, large goes on large, medium goes on medium, small goes on small, and I have these various things I can use for multiple. That's really it. After that, I have a utility slot, which goes also small to medium, where I can put my fusion reactors if I want to, get some armor plating on them if I want to, and so on. And I can then exchange a couple of things like modulators, the type of combat computer I want, type of engine I want, and the type of scanners I want. All of this combines with a use of power, a use of resources, gives me hull points, gives me armor, gives me shielding, etc, etc. I can make 2 cruisers, 2 destroyers, whatever I want, to be completely different with completely different functions. One might be very designed around combat, going in deep, heavy fighting, and a different one might be designed around scanning and figuring things out. And combining and mixing and matching all of these into a fleet will give you a very well-rounded fleet. You can also select to make 2 or 3 fleets, just so you have a strike fleet, a fast getaway fleet. Maybe you have a bombardment fleet that can take a big beating. Maybe you have a fleet that's designed around defense that isn't very mobile, but can take and dish out a lot of damage stationary, you can combine these as you deem fit, which is a really, really cool thing. The ship designer, phenomenal. All of these things you can research, build up, and design yourself based on the ship aesthetic you've chosen. And I really love this because this is so pretty looking. And it's not only pretty looking in this view. If I go to my fleet and I zoom in, you can see the various ships I've built. You can zoom in quite far in this game, and they do look stunningly beautiful based on the designs you've chosen. Even for a game that is mostly about playing in a very long range and relying on icons and little dots on your screen, they have put a lot of effort in making it look pretty. Again, that is one of the main reasons I am so sad that the options menu allowing you to customize this look isn't better, because the game does look gorgeous, and you can make it more gorgeous by giving players a variety of options to customize as they deem fit. But that is a gripe for another day. A fleet is combined, a fleet is sent out, fleets can bombard planets. There's quite a few things around and available that you can do this with. So that combines us and brings us to the final state, which is extermination. Warfare in this game is pretty straightforward. You fight an enemy, and it goes on a point-based system, based on the combat you've done. So the fleet clashes, the objectives set during the war. So if you have a war, you set an objective, say, I want your homeworld. Then everything you do in rewards to that objective decides the war. And then the war goes, and they can attack your fleet, and you can attack their fleets, and you can attack mining operations and planets and bombard it, etc. And the war will continue until either side surrenders, or until the objective is reached. And at that point, the war ends, and you start a minimum of a 10-year truce. So you can't just declare a war, win, declare the next war, win. You do have to have a little bit of time between them. If you want to destroy an empire in one big fell swoop, you're going to have to declare a war equal to that one big fell swoop. These little tiny take a planet, take a system ideas that are very common in games like Civilizations just are not going to work here unless you spend an inordinate amount of time doing so, which is not exactly the most efficient way to play. So I applaud that design decision by the developers. Now, there's a couple of things I haven't touched on yet, so I'm going to bring those together here and talk about all of them in one fell swoop. We've talked about research. What we've not talked about is the government. Now, government is one of the major things in this game, and it is pretty impressive. Each type of government aspect, such as migration, such as resettlement, such as leadership, such as first contact protocols, you can combine and customize these as you deem fit to customize your empire to the best of your ability. You can make a very benign race, you can make a very aggressive race, you can do a variety of things, such as even having AI. You can say it's outlawed or only in servitude. There's quite a few things to customize. There's also edicts you can enact, and that results in more or less of a resource called influence, which you gain or lose based on how much influence you can enact on your people. So that's all pretty cool. Other than that, you have demographics, allowing you to see how your empire is built up of various races and various ethnicities. It also tells you the bonuses and stuff like that. And you also have a budget tab, which isn't very detailed. It's better to go planet to planet and go over the various breakdowns in the tooltips. But it does give you a little bit of a rundown to know what you are into. Again, this micromanagement type of style is central to the game's gameplay, and if you're not into that sort of thing, this is not the game for you. If you are into that sort of thing, well, this is a pretty good game for that. The game also has this sort of leadership type of thing, where specific individuals have a major impact to a colony, to your empire, to a planet, to science, to research types, to benefits, how fast research takes, to even warfare and combat, where they have benefits such as reducing the warp charge up time, increasing unit morale, lowering the amount of damage they take. There's quite a few things that will slightly increase or decrease your value, because these are not only benefits, they can also be negatives such as paranoia, fear, and stuff like that based on certain actions that happen in the game world. Now, let's combine all of these things and bring on a pile. The game has interesting exploration with a variety of mechanics that tie into expansion and exploitation. It has a pretty cool way of doing expansion in a variety of faster life modes, colonizations, sectors which are independent, where you do not micromanage because you can only have so many planets under your direct control. It allows you to find rare resources, do research on those resources, and figure out new technologies. Then you have exploitation. It allows you very fine-tuned control over the populace, over what research you're building, where you're building them, how you're spending them, how they're generated, what kind of maintenance costs you accrue. Even allows you full control whether or not you want to enslave races, emancipate races, create robots, destroy them, and resettle populace or even allow resettlement of populace. And it also has all the benefits and side effects and negatives of those various things, such as rebellions, cessations of your empire, or even enemy players and AI deciding to attack you, remove you from your alliances, or not engage in trade with you. On the other side, you could even get an ally out of it because you share such similar policies. So, then we bring to the warfare, the simplest part of it, but the various shipbuilding tools that also benefit exploitation and expansion do give it a very fine-tuned feel of control. It's just that the combat itself is pretty simple. Which brings us to our conclusions for Stellaris. Outside of the issues I spoke about, with a lackluster help interface and a very lackluster PC options menu and PC options, there's very few things outside of a couple of things that are just hidden or not displayed quite as well that I have with the game, such as not being able to detect whether or not the enemy is as strong or weaker than you are, even though the game tells you they are about equivalent. At the end of the day, if you enjoy 4Xs, if you enjoy games like Civilizations, then Stellaris is a phenomenal game. It has a lot to offer, both in terms of replayability, in terms of multiplayer gameplay, and in terms of single-player gameplay, because let's be frank and fair, this is a galaxy, 40 races, all AI, with me in them, and they are kicking my butt. I can wholeheartedly recommend this title on the condition that you already enjoy 4Xs. I don't feel this is a entry-level game. While it does do a great job of having a fully voiced tutorial explaining a variety of systems in the game, there is still quite a few moving parts and aspects to this game and to 4Xs in general, which I normally don't see in simpler games like Polaris Sector. This game has all of that complexity, which makes it a more in-depth game for sure, but it also makes it a more complex game. So yes, wholehearted recommendation if you are into 4Xs. Otherwise, you might want to read up on this game a little bit before diving into it. It's not a bad game by any stretch of the imagination, but it does have a ton of moving parts that you need to understand. Otherwise, you might just end up confused and not enjoying your playtime with the game. If you are interested in this game, you can check it out on Steam. It is coming out on May 9th for the total price of €40. And if you like this video, you can press the like button below. If you didn't like this video, well, there's a dislike button for exactly that. And leave a comment. Tell us what we can do better. Tell us what you enjoyed. We want to hear back from all of you. And if you want to see more videos like this on the channel, just press that subscribe button down below and we will deliver. So thank you for watching. I'll see you next time, right here on GUYLOGIC.